This is the reason why NASA never returned to Moon. During the Apollo project, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration of the United States landed around 12 people on the Moon between 1969 and 1972. Despite various policy initiatives by American presidents, no humans have ever gone on the Moon. What is the reason behind NASA never returning to the Moon? Let's find out in this video. Here we begin. NASA has been pushing the boundaries of knowledge since the first moon landing 50 years ago to fulfill the promise of American creativity and leadership in space. And NASA will continue that work by sending astronauts to the moon and landing on the lunar South Pole by 2024. NASA's mission is to lead an innovative and sustainable exploration program with commercial and international partners to enhance human expansion across the solar system, following the President's Space Policy Directive 1. The Apollo program was costly for the United States, and the cost varies according to historical sources. Still, most agree that it cost around $20 billion in 1973, equivalent to $120 billion USD today. NASA consumed approximately 4% of annual federal spending in the mid-1960s, compared to 0.5% recently. They also intended to send humans to the moon via Apollo 20 and later to adapt its moon mission technology for other exploration via the AAP Apollo Applications Program. But unfortunately, congressional budget cuts to NASA accelerated the end of the moon mission of Apollo 17 in 1972, and most AAP programs were shelved except for the space station Skylab. Congress cut NASA funding for a variety of reasons. The space race, a competition between the Soviet Union and the United States to demonstrate military and technological superiority to other nations, provided the initial impetus for landing on the moon. The competition cooled in the 1960s, removing the strategic imperative to invest in NASA. Meanwhile, other public priorities, higher among them, were emerging. After the first human landing on the moon on July 20, 1969, on Apollo 2, public interest in space began to wane. Space historians Howard E. McCurdy and Roger D. Launius make an additional case for Apollo in their 1997 book, Spaceflight and Myth of Presidential Leadership. Because he was concerned about Soviet military prowess, U.S. President John F. Kennedy made space exploration and the moon landings one of the country's main policies. As a result, NASA and its programs adopted a détente policy and have remained there ever since. Reasons for NASA not returning to the moon. It was expensive, but not that much. The steep cost is a tried-and-true barrier for any spaceflight program, particularly for missions involving people. Nevertheless, President Donald Trump signed legislation in March 2017 that provides NASA with an annual budget of approximately $19.5 billion, possibly increasing to $19.9 billion in 2019. Either amount appears to be a windfall until you consider that it'll be divided among all of the agency's divisions and ambitious projects, including the James Webb Space Telescope, the Space Launch System, and far-flung missions to the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, the Kuiper Belt, the Asteroid Belt, and the Solar System's edge. Furthermore, NASA's budget is relatively small in comparison to its past. NASA's share of the federal budget reached 4% in 1965. It has remained below 1% for the past 40 years, and for the last 15 years, it has been trending toward 0.4% of the federal budget. Trump's budget proposes a return to the moon, followed by an orbital visit to Mars. However, given the ballooning costs and escalating delays associated with NASA's SLS rocket program, they may need to be more funding to reach either destination, even if the International Space Station is decommissioned early. According to NASA, report from 2005, returning to the moon would cost approximately $104 billion over about 13 years. Today, the Apollo program costs around $120 billion. The problem with presidents. The immediate goal of the Trump administration is to send astronauts to the moon's vicinity in 2023. That'll be near the end of Trump's second term if he's reelected. And therein lies another significant issue: partisan political whiplash. It's all about the mission from the perspective of astronauts. The process of designing, engineering, and testing a spacecraft capable of transporting humans to another planet easily outlasts a two-term president. Unfortunately, there is a predictable pattern of incoming presidents and lawmakers abandoning the previous administration's space exploration priorities. For example, in 2004, the Bush administration tasked NASA with developing a plan to replace the Space Shuttle, which was set to retire and return to the moon. As a result, the agency devised the Constellation program to land astronauts on the moon using an Ares rocket and an Orion spaceship. Over 5 years, NASA spent $9 billion designing, building, and testing hardware for the human spaceflight program. However, after President Barack Obama took office and the Government Accountability Office issued a report about NASA's inability to estimate the cost of a constellation, Obama pushed to cancel the program and instead signed off on the Space Launch System, or SLS rocket. Trump still needs to abandon SLS. However, he changed Obama's goal of sending astronauts to an asteroid and then to the Moon and Mars. Such frequent changes in NASA's costly priorities have resulted in cancellation after cancellation, a loss of approximately $20 billion and years of squandered time and momentum. The will of the American people voting for politicians is the driving force behind the government's commitment to return to the Moon. But unfortunately, public interest in lunar exploration has been lukewarm at best. Even for the Apollo program, after Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the Moon, only 53% of Americans thought it was worthwhile. The rest of the time, the US approval of Apollo was significantly lower than 50%. Today, 55% of Americans believe NASA should prioritize returning to the Moon, but only a quarter believe it should be a top priority. However, 44% believe sending astronauts back to the Moon should be avoided. Why will they surely return to the Moon soon? It's a lead to Mars. Mars is around 200 times farther from Earth than the Moon, creating a huge challenge in keeping astronauts safe from radiation exposure. The main goal of Apollo was to beat the Soviet Union to the Moon. It was successful, but there was no long-term plan to establish a permanent human presence there. Experts believe Artemis has the potential to change that, and we can see a minimal shift toward a human presence on the Moon. SpaceX has been chosen to provide the Starship that'll land Artemis astronauts on the Moon's surface. That possibility may not be as remote as previously thought. Could spur new technologies. Dozens of new technologies developed to travel to space and the Moon have also provided significant benefits to people on Earth, giving birth to everything from handheld computers to freeze-dried food and insulin pumps. Artemis could inspire similar breakthroughs. According to a NASA-commissioned study from 2013, commercial products derived from the space agency's research contribute between $100 million and $1 billion to the U.S. economy each year. Many of those spin-offs originated with the Apollo program. For example, the Apollo guidance computer was a technological marvel in its day. It demonstrated digital fly-by-wire technology, which is now used in commercial and military aircraft. New flame-retardant fabrics, originally developed for spacesuits to withstand extremely high temperatures while remaining lightweight, are now used in clothing to protect firefighters across the country. In addition, according to NASA, super insulation developed for NASA in the 1960s can be found hidden inside the walls or roofs of buildings, in MRI machines and cryogenic tanks, in winter gear, and in cases for electronic devices, among other applications. A lot of science to be done. The rock samples returned by Apollo astronauts decades ago taught scientists much about Earth's and the Moon's geologic history. Because it's easier to land a spacecraft near the Moon's equator, all 6 Apollo landings took place there. However, NASA now has more ambitious goals. NASA announced 13 possible landing sites in the South Pole region in August, just before the first launch attempt, where water ice has been found deep inside craters that never see sunlight. Artemis 2, a crewed lunar flyby, is scheduled for 2024. Artemis 3, the first crewed landing, could arrive as early as 2025. NASA's Artemis Moon mission ushers in a new era of space exploration. The lunar South Pole region is described by Kring as absolutely extraordinary geologic terrain. There's no better place to go than the Moon if you really want to understand the solar system's evolution and its origin. Because the Moon has never had an atmosphere or water, it is immune to weathering and erosion, preserving evidence of its origin. As technology has advanced in the decades since Apollo, the level of detail revealed by probes like the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter on the Moon's surface is so extraordinary that astronauts already identified rocks on the lunar surface that they want the astronauts to collect. What do you think of NASA's plan to return to the Moon? Let us know in the comments below and subscribe for more.